Welcome to No Room for Phonies, episode 62, a knitting brackets crocheting story.
Very good.
And so Charles is going to talk about his knitting crocheting life.
And you'll join in at some point.
I will. The green light moment. I read this thing about green light moments, and I just wanted to share it. A green light moment is being kind to our future selves. Thank you. I couldn't see because of your T arm. It's things in our life that affirm our way. They say go, proceed, more please, carry on. So those are the green light moments. It's the moment of I am enough and I know myself and I am satisfied with the path that I've chosen. I don't slow down for things that don't fit into who I am and what I value. I push through yellow lights when I maybe feel a little bit of fear, right?
Yep.
Or whatever. And sometimes I red light to reflect and rebuild.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool to just think about it in terms of like, when something just feels like the right thing to do and you just kind of do it, like baking 400 loaves of Pascha for Easter. Does that feel like the right thing to do?
Yes, it does.
So,
well, I would say more like 2 dozen.
More than 2 dozen.
At the end, will there be more than 2 dozen?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but that's all right. That's just part of what we'd like to do at Easter.
Mm-hmm.
So the book recommendation is the one you're reading, which I have not read.
And it's called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me, in parentheses. And it's an excellent book, all about how when us humans make a mistake, we have a hard time admitting it. And sometimes we get so entrenched in the beliefs or the ideas or the opinions behind the fact that about why we made the mistake that we did, that we keep digging ourselves deeper into the mud, or for lack of a better
does it explain? I mean, not that
there's about politics, but there's also like about people who believe that aliens are going to that aliens have picked them up out of their vehicles and whatever.
Okay.
And then when it's been proven to them with why things happened on that particular day, like actually with sleep patterns and other scientific methods, they still justify it.
Right. And maybe vaccine hesitation or feelings about like that sort of stuff. Yeah. And even if you think, oh, well, maybe I'm wrong, but you're so entrenched and you don't want to.
You can't back out of your belief system
because then you have too deep into it.
So, and there's a lot about cognitive dissonance, and it's really, really good.
Good. Okay. So mistakes were made, but not by me. And my podcast recommendation is kind of not on the same line, I guess, but kind of like about people who make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's called The Authoritarian Personality. It was recommended by a friend of ours, Frank, and by Nala Ayed. It's a CBC podcast, and it's
one
so
particular
poignant.
episode, right?
Yeah, it's so poignant right now because of all that's happening. You know, well, us just having come through the Trump era, and then it goes all the way back to Hitler, but it goes through a lot of other things, and it's fascinating. There's a little quiz in it that we took.
Right. How fascist you are.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, I would highly recommend it. The Authoritarian Personality by Nala Ayed on CBC Podcasts. So how did it begin? The knitting and crochet journey. How did it begin?
I was 10 years old and living in Colombia, and we took a vacation trip. It was like about a week to a more rural area of the country. And one day in the market square of the village we were visiting, I saw a whole bunch of shepherds and shepherdesses, and the women were tending the sheep and their kids and spinning yarn on drop spindles, which looks like a stick with a rock on the bottom of it. The primitive versions do. And the men were standing around knitting ponchos and book bags and things like that. And so I asked my dad, because I knew that working with needles and stuff was like, I had seen my grandmother do it basically, and some of my mother's friends. So I wanted to learn how to do that. And so he got me a knitting teacher, which happened to be my grade 4 teacher at the time at the school I was at.
In Colombia.
In Colombia. And he bought me my needles and yarn, and she started me going knitting. But I just realized that I had learned to crochet earlier.
When?
When I was 4. I had chickenpox, so I was home from kindergarten, and my mom had a friend over, and my mom's friend was crocheting a hat. And I remember just watching her hands moving and this hat coming into being very fast. And I asked what she was doing, and she got out a hook and yarn and taught me how to do the chain stitch and how to single crochet. And then I just probably played around with it for a little bit. And when I learned how to read, I remember my mom was making table placemats, and I wanted to relearn how to do it.
She was crocheting placemats?
She was crocheting placemats out of cotton thread.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. Okay.
In the 70s. It was
yeah.
big.
Yeah, for sure.
And then so she taught me or reminded me how to do some of the stitches and gave me the book, a spare book that she had there, and I started making doilies. And I think I did that for about a year.
And now you just sold a doily for?
Just sold the doily to Crochet World magazine.
For like a lot of money.
For a lot of money. So
anyway, that's farther ahead in the story.
I sold the design, yeah.
Yeah.
And the doily. Anyway, yeah, so that was kind of the start. But knitting really took off, and I stayed with that for a good 5 years. In my grade 5 class, I started a all-boys knitting club, Girls Not Allowed, and I taught all the boys in the school.
And did boys came?
Yeah, there was about 6 of us, and we all made headbands and wristbands because it was cool in the 70s to have these red and white wristbands.
That's funny.
And then, of course, they all dropped interest, but I kept going. And when I was in high school, there was an extra credit that I needed to fill, and teacher said I could do a spare or I could do a distance ed course. What's that called? What's called something else? Correspondence course.
Back then, it was called a correspondence course. No online learning back then.
And I didn't really, I was going to do that. And then 2 girls in my grade had the same situation. So they were going to take home ec. And I said, well, what are you doing in home ec? And they said, well, we're going to learn how to knit. So I said, well, I already know how to knit. So I asked the teacher, could I learn how to design a sweater? Because I wanted to move on to sweaters. I had just been doing hats and slippers. And she said, well, I don't know how to design, but we'll find a book. And then my math teacher actually taught me enough trigonometry and algebra to do the calculations I needed. And I designed my first sweater at 15.
Wow.
And then from then on, I've always wanted to design.
And you worked in when did you work? So then I
graduated high school, came to Canada at 18. And when I was 19, I worked in a yarn store for a year and a half.
In Niagara-on-the-Lake.
When
they had a yarn store, which is shocking now that they don't really have a yarn store.
No, well, remember for a little while, there was that one, and then they moved to Virgil, and now they're not there anymore.
Yeah, they're not. I think COVID kind of probably did them in. But
so, yeah.
And then you went to university, knitting
through university. I learned how to spin yarn on a spinning wheel and how to use a loom when I was in my early 20s. I took my spinning wheel with me to my master's degree in British Columbia. Right. And when I didn't want to do homework, I spun yarn. And I was always knitting.
Responsible of you.
Yes. Well, knitting became my refuge from
and you
stress.
Did not knit me a sweater while we were dating because we dated fast.
Well, there was something called the boyfriend.
Well, we got married too fast.
Well, yeah, I could have made a sweater in that period of time.
Yeah.
But you had all the sweaters that I had knit for
myself.
I
wore a lot of your already knit sweaters and still wear them.
I had about 5 or 6 that were pretty decent. And there was a myth called the boyfriend's curse, which is usually women don't knit sweaters for boyfriends because if you do, you break up with them once you give them the sweater. So Anyway, I didn't knit you one because I didn't want that.
And then we got married.
And
I did not knit.
I tried to teach you.
And that did not work.
She threw the needle and yarn across the room.
Yeah, I was not ready, apparently. Anyway, and then we became...
And the spouses teaching each other things. I don't know.
I got pregnant, and then you knit
for Zachary coming home. What's it called? Come home from the hospital outfit.
Little blue outfit.
And then I stopped.
For a long time.
I had rabbits busy. And I was collecting the rabbit fur to spin.
Yeah.
But I didn't do anything with it for a long time. And then...
When did you start again?
I started in 2005.
When you stopped... Well,
I made that little outfit for Eden, for Frank and...
Oh, for Frank
That was the first thing I did after all those years.
When Eden was born.
Yeah. So I made that little
isn't
sweater.
That interesting? Okay, yeah. I never
So then that started my journey back again. And then the internet existed. And people were blogging about what they were knitting. And there was a community online which was better and bigger than Facebook, and still is better than Facebook, but it's basically Facebook for knitters. It's called Ravel.
I was going to say, do you not want to say what it is?
It's called Ravelry.com. And so I was in the first 1,000 people to join Ravelry, and I started posting my designs, and I posted a hat pattern, and a yarn company really liked it, and they hired me to design for them.
Right.
And then launched me into designing. And then I met all sorts of people in the crochet and knitting community online. And I took a course on how to publish a crochet pattern in a magazine from a friend. Well, she became our friend, Mary Beth. And then she talked to me about tech editing. Which is basically what I do for my day job teaching ESL and editing and marking essays. But now you're looking at a knitting pattern or a crochet pattern, and you're checking all the instructions for accuracy, punctuation, good math, all the rest of it. And so I started to tech edit for her, and until I got better at it. And then she connected me with the rest of the industry, and then I started tech editing for yarn companies and other designers, and eventually for publishers of books and magazines. Yeah, so I did that for 10 years, tech editing.
Yeah. And still taught part-time.
And because I taught ESL part-time.
Because that leads me into like the cautions of the creative career.
Oh, yeah. So, now with social media... if you want to have a career, you have to become popular, because the only way to make it anywhere is to win the popularity contest. And that was just starting when I was doing my designing and tech editing. But that's where I went towards technical editing, because that was a steady income, and I wasn't reliant on how many posts I did on Instagram and how cute I could do. And
but it was time consuming, and it wasn't super well paid.
No, exactly.
So I mean...
And I do know people that make a living and for their families from this, but they work 72 to 90 hours a week. It's a hustle.
Yeah.
And it's not the easiest thing to do. And then if you lose popularity, your business can tank.
Right. So
when the new young designers come along, some of the old ones are neglected.
Yeah. And I think as well, like I did some quilt blogging for a company that shall not be named, and they were just cheap at paying. Like you create a whole quilt and you get next to nothing for it. Like
and a lot of
like a whole blog.
Yeah,
you create a quilt block and write a whole blog and do a little video, and you get $50.
Yeah,
like that's although I've designed some things for a company in the States, Prime Publishing, I will say.
Yeah.
We Like Sewing, which is got lots of great stuff if you're looking for sewing patterns and stuff. And they pay
very well.
Very well.
That's very interesting. Like I work,
you just have to be really careful.
Yep. I now currently will design commissions for certain yarn companies or magazines because they pay well. And they don't rely on you being popular. They rely on you knowing how to write a good pattern and not be full of mistakes. But it's time consuming because you have to make the whole thing, not just write the instructions.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, now I do some of the, like you were hiring.
I was hiring sample makers. And
now I kind of do that part because I can.
Because she's learned how to crochet too.
And knit. Yeah,
so knitting you learned 10 years ago already.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I started by, if you're ever wanting to start knitting, I started by doing garter stitch blankets, huge ones.
220 stitches.
Across.
Yarn held double, so it was nice and thick. And then you just knit.
And I've just kind of thrown scrappy yarn.
Just leftover yarns.
And I think I've thrown most all of those blankets away now. They were starting to get ratty. Yeah, get ratty and frayed. But I mean...
But it made her attention even, and she could read and knit and watch TV and knit, and now you can ride in the car and knit. So
pretty much, yeah.
Which is pretty funny because the first experience of teaching you to knit with you throwing the stuff across the room.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, that's it.
As the month go, I'm gonna post some of our projects and things, and a lot. If you go to the website,
Ravelry or
our own site,
noroomforphonies.com,
that there's a knitting and a crocheting section to it, so you can look at some of our projects. And
a lot more.
Yeah, and he's gonna start posting a few more of his projects. On there. You know, so that you can kind of see.
Mm-hmm. So, and I made sure I taught both our sons how to knit and crochet, and just because I wanted them to have the skill, I didn't expect them to actually ever develop a love for it, and they haven't, which is fine.
Well, and I mean, but I at first didn't want to either, and then all of a sudden your life circumstances change, and you have more time on your hands, retirement, all that sort of stuff. And then you're like happy.
And so tell me what it's like when I'm knitting in public and a woman comes over and starts talking to me.
I am so tired of this. Oh, that's so interesting. Like, do you when did you you're knitting? Like, they're just like, oh, it's very unusual to see a man knitting. And I'm like, and if we're both sitting somewhere and we're both knitting or crocheting, people are just astounded that we're like, both of us are knitting.
Well, you'll get all the, aren't you lucky that your husband knits with you?
And I'm like, lets
you buy yarn.
And I'm like, actually, he started and I jumped on the train. So
well, the funniest thing is because there's a lot of people in our generation who think that only gay men do knitting and crochet. Yeah. So they kind of look at the two of us, and when we had children around and we were both knitting, they were kind of like, could not get their heads around this straight married man knitting. But I mean, crazy. I think our partnership, it's a dumb stereotype.
I think our partnership in knitting and crocheting now is fun. We make I
think it's a lot of fun.
We make a little money.
I'm learning a little bit about quilting from you.
He's joining in with some of that. And
I mean, I know the sewing machine, but I don't know any of the other stuff. So.
Well, and I mean, it's just a matter of and you have an eye for color, and so quilting is a lot about that too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's a fun thing to think of, in the next, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, you'll probably retire too.
Yeah.
And so then we'll probably continue to.
Well, we just converted, it's now that we're empty nesters, we converted our one bedroom the one room in the house back into a bedroom for us. And our old bedroom is going to become an extension of the sewing room.
Yeah.
It'll be the weaving and knitting room. So,
yeah. So we're going to, figure out what we want to do in there and start, having maybe a bit more yarn that's
on display
and stuff. So yeah, I've got lots left to do because I have to start by moving everything out of the sewing room and painting the floor.
Yeah.
So that seems like there's a lot of stuff in the sewing room.
There is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not mine.
Anyway, there's a lot.
All my yarn is in the closet.
But anyway, we are looking forward to many, many years of like having this as kind of our thing that we do.
Yeah. And so knitting or crocheting is very good for like as meditation for calming stress.
We often in the morning get up and we might listen to something sort of inspiring or educational first when we're having coffee in the morning, and we often are knitting when we do that, and it's a good calm way to start the day.
And there are days when I know that there's it's going to be a rough day at work or whatever. I will definitely make sure I knit 2 or 3 rows just to regulate my blood pressure.
Yes, good. I'm yawning today because we moved everything. We finally finished the bedroom. We've been painting it and doing everything. And so I cleaned it and we moved all the furniture over today. So I am like...
tired.
I'm tired. Yeah. I'm ready to... But anyway, it's a fun partnership. So then I just wanted you to talk a tiny bit about kind of the battle between knitting and crochet.
Well,
exists, right? And so if somebody thinks, oh, I'm going to get into this, and then all of a sudden they're like, somebody says something snotty to them.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. Knitters, until maybe 10 years ago, were very much snobby about the fact that they knit and didn't crochet. In lots parts of Canada and northern US. In Europe, the distinction was not quite so big of a deal.
Okay.
And in South America, neither.
Well, and in our group.
But there was a big status around... knitting is for the privileged and crochet is for the underprivileged. There's several roots of those attitudes. Some of it goes back to the UK, but some of it goes to a very prolific author of knitting called Elizabeth Zimmerman. And she talked about how the servants should be crocheting and that, the ladies of the household should be knitting. Well,
and I also say...
So that started a big snobism towards
well, and
crochet.
I also think that crochet has advanced a ton. Like it used to be
the granny square.
Yeah. And I mean, now the granny square is back.
Yes,
as
it's
kind of like a
vintage
whatever. But, I think in the beginning, crochet was fairly...
Well, and people also associated the 1970s avocado green and burnt orange ponchos and skirts made out of granny squares.
Yeah.
The thing is, the doily and the lace is not very popular. It's still not really.
But I've knit, I knit.
But all that lacy, frilly stuff. But all those hoodies for
all those little kids were all crocheted, and you would never know.
No, it might as well be.
But
knit.
you can whip them up so much faster.
Yes, crochet is way faster than knitting. It uses if you're doing solid stitches, crochet does use more yarn than knitting, but that's not a big deal. So there's a bit of snobbery around it. It's fading. Fortunately, it's not the same.
Well, and the other thing is the whole status of the kind of yarn. Like when we went to a knitting group, it got nasty, and it got uncomfortable for those people who really maybe couldn't. Like it was supposed to be a really wide open group for lots of people.
Yeah,
but there were some people who could afford really nice yarn, and there were some people who could not. So, but I didn't care.
No, because yarn is yarn,
and for us,
yes, it has different uses. And if you're going to knit with alpaca or cashmere, you're going to make something that you're going to not wash by hand, and it's going to
you are going to wash by hand.
You are only going to wash by hand. It's going to be treasured for 40 years. And versus buying something, knitting with acrylic that's going to be washed in a washing machine. That's
what I mean. When I knit a baby blanket, I don't knit it out of cashmere because
but there are the people. The yarn snobs are so snobby that they will make baby blankets out of wool, sheep's wool. I mean, there is washable sheep's wool that doesn't shrink, but they insist that that's the only way to. So
there's a bit of a. Just like in all parts of life, status.
And I went to some conventions in the wholesale knitting yarn industry, and at the convention, I met people who were also doing rubber stamping, and what's those the paper crafts card with all the cards and
Scrapbooking?
Scrapbooking. Okay. So the scrapbookers were looking down on the rubber stampers as inferior, and I could not believe the status around. And I think it just goes through people with money want to think they're special, so they make whatever handicraft they do special. And elevated and make the other people
But
feel.
I mean, the bottom line is like, I had at the bottom here, like getting published, but you kind of talked about how you got published.
Yeah.
And you did do a book, an emoji book.
Yes, I did do an emoji book. So you can make blankets and a hoodie and pillows, and you can change the emoji face to what you want. It's all customizable.
Yeah. So, I mean... but I think the main thing for us is that the enjoyment and the gift giving, right? Oh, there's this emoji book.
So if you're watching on video, you can see the cover of the book.
Yeah. For us, it's just a way to relax. And I mean, right now I'm crocheting. I knit some little washcloths.
And you're folding them
I'm making them into bunnies. I have one right here. I should show that.
Get them on the video.
I'll show a bunny that I crochet.
So that's one thing about crochet is you can do a lot more 3-dimensional things with crochet really fast.
Oh, I'm falling.
You all right?
Yep. There. Oh, where's the camera?
Right there.
Why can't I get it? Okay.
There.
See, there is the little bunny ears. And then back here...
You have to move it towards me.
Why am I having such a hard time? Yeah. Back there is his little tail. Bunny tail. So there it is. Little
and then you
bunny. And then you just take off the ribbon. It's a washcloth.
So crochet lends itself to 3-dimensional. Knitting can do 3-dimensional, but it's a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
And knitting lends itself more to garments, although things are changing. The better crochet designers know how to... if anybody is a crocheter and you've never made a garment, all you do is use a bigger hook with thinner yarn, and you're going to have the same drape as knitting, and you'll have a really nice garment.
And if you have questions or you want to talk about or ask things about knitting, you can go on the website, and there's lots of room for questions on there.
Yeah, and send an email.
So send an email, do whatever you want. And if you're looking for a pattern, we recommend Ravelry.
Yeah.
That has, and some of ours
there's
that
lots
are
of
free.
There's lots of free patterns on Ravelry, but lots of pay ones to help the designers, support your designers. And
also on our No Room for Phonies blog, you can look at the knitting and crocheting projects that we've done together or separately or whatever. Yep. But lots of times he designs something, I crochet or knit it.
So what's your next big knitting or crochet project? What's yours?
What's my next big? Well, I'm still working on that sweater.
Oh, right. That sweater for yourself.
For myself, but I got distracted by... I'm just trying to look up what the next podcast is because I didn't write it down. Okay. Because...
So, you see this yarn? Tweed. This is going to become a baby blanket. Gray and... peach and
that's
cream.
Pretty for a baby blanket. So I do want to finish that sweater. We're working on the sock project this year. So you're one sock behind.
I have lots of one sock wonders.
I'm forcing him to finish.
So I have orphan socks, and I have to do the second sock for about 4
but you're still one sock behind me.
Yes,
you didn't get your March sock done.
I didn't get my March.
March sock, and I got my first April sock almost done.
Wow!
So I'll have to do my second April sock, and then you're going to be so behind. It's going to be so sad. But oh well, hopefully you'll catch up. Anyway, you can follow the sock project. That's online as well on No Room for Phonies. Yep. So so our next, so that's the knitting story.
Yeah.
A knitting story. And the next one that we're going to do is a podcast called Everyone is Doing the Best They Can.
With what they have.
No.
No.
That's not what it says. Stop it. Because then you're judging.
Oh, I'm so judgy.
You're so judgy. Anyway, we're going to talk about that. Everyone is doing the best they can.
I look forward to it.
All right.
Thanks for listening to A Knitting Story and a Crochet Journey.
A knitting story and a crochet journey on No Room for Phonies.